Hi everybody, this is Aaron Murakami with Peter Lindemann, and today is October 27th, Monday, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Bedini SG book trilogy, where if you've been following our work over the last few years, we've released a beginner and intermediate book for Bedini's SG technology, and coming up here on November 2nd, we're going to be releasing the advanced book, which is probably the most highly anticipated book or video that we've ever released consistently over the past several years. The Bedini SG package with both the beginning and intermediate books have been always pretty much the most popular books out of anything.
Yeah, people are very interested in it. So, yeah, we just coming up with a book that actually deserved to be the Complete Advanced Handbook was what was tough, because
Calling it complete.
complete, so like, obviously John's still alive, so he's still a brilliant inventor, so, complete means complete up to now.
Right.
But, yeah, so anyway, we are really, really pleased to be getting all this information out at this
Right.
point.
So, over the years, you've known John a lot longer than I have, back into the 80s.
Yeah, I met John in 1983.
83, and I met him in about 1999
Yeah.
when he was at the end of Celtics Way.
Yeah,
And that was right about the time when Shawnee Bauman, the story of her doing the science project with the little roller skate wheel kind of
Right.
SG came into play. So, from you knowing John way back then, what about John's work do you remember that specifically ties into the SG and kind of the genesis of where, that kind of came from?
well, basically, John was interested in, figuring out how to develop a self-running combination of electric motor and electric generator, he claims back into his childhood. Unfortunately, I have to admit that I was obsessed with the same thing, and we've always been told it's impossible and it can't be done and all these other things. And, he and I were working on this really a lot in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. We both kind of got turned on to the whole possibility of this in a very, very strong way when we both ran into the work of Ed Gray in '73 actually. And Ed Gray's technology was just like a real kick in the teeth for everybody, because it claimed gains of between 20 and 50 times more energy than it was taking, and kept its batteries charged and produced 80 horsepower and things like this. And so I mean, we both got obsessed with the cold electricity ideas and these the fact, as far as we understood, that a self-running electric motor had been developed. And we just wanted to know more. We couldn't get anything more out of Gray. He was in a business situation where he couldn't release a lot of proprietary information. So it just kind of set us off. It proved to both of us that it was done. There was a fait accompli, and we didn't know how. So, we wanted to know how. So we both set out for it, and John just got way farther ahead than anybody else, because he had this business where he was building audio amplifiers. So he had a shop, he had an income, he had a place where he could do this. He had
Doing really good business.
Good business, building some of the most astonishing audio amplifiers that have ever been made. Really the first one to figure out how to get all that warm, fuzzy feeling of the vacuum tube amplifiers, and be able to replicate those qualities in the audio with transistors. and so he made a small fortune doing that, and so he had the resources to fund his favorite hobby, which was this. And
those amplifiers are still being sold on eBay today from the 80s for thousands of dollars.
oh yeah, for way more than they
More than
cost
they cost
originally.
brand new.
Yeah, you know, and they're still running, which is really incredible too. I mean, people get these things out of estate sales and stuff, and send them back to have new capacitors put into a 30-year-old amplifier, and John's rebuilding these things periodically. And yeah, if you go onto eBay and type in Bedini amplifier, there are dozens of them on the market at all times. So yeah, they're selling for more than they ever did when they were new. So that's the testament to the fact of how good they are, how in demand they still are, even after all this time. So yeah, I mean, John's a brilliant circuit designer, engineer, been doing this kind of stuff, pushing all the industries forward that he's been involved in, and one of them is this energy industry, this understanding of how to tap into these very unusual electromagnetic effects to produce self-running electromechanical machines.
So in the early days on this path to free energy, and when it started to come out to the public, his first publication regarding that was probably the Bedini's Free Energy Generator around 1984.
1984.
And at it was 1984 Tesla Symposium at the end of June in Colorado Springs, where Jim Watson ran a pretty scaled up model based on John's design, and kept itself charged up while spinning a 100-pound flywheel.
Yeah, exactly. So Jim Watson built a big one out of John's little booklet, and the thing that was so odd about that booklet, because I was around when that came out, and I'd been working with a number of people, including Bruce De Palma and a number of others in the Santa Barbara area, so I wasn't that far away from where John was in the LA area, and we were working with specific ideas and specific designs of how to accomplish these goals, and we looked at John's plans at the time, and we just thought, nah, this can't work. This is just way too silly, way too simple, and so it's just like, even though we were directly involved in the field, John's ideas were so advanced that even I didn't get it. It's hindsight in 30 years looking back, it's embarrassing, but the fact is that John had it. He told us he had it, and me and almost everybody else didn't believe it. So
and he put it all out there.
He put it all out there. He did what we were talking about wanting to do. That was publish the method. And when he did, everybody looked at it and said, nah, that isn't it, and went on, and so he kept working on it, but after that, people kept screaming at him, why don't you show us how to do it, and all this kind of stuff, and he's always just kind of smiled and gone on, because he did show them how to do it, and it's been everybody's problem that they never took him seriously, and they never actually built one to see if it worked. Little steps like that, that never happened, and I was as guilty as everyone, just condemnation without investigation, based on what I thought I already knew. And the reason it worked was based on things that I didn't know, and that's what I didn't know about what I didn't know. And so, I mean, ignorance is a wonderful thing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's great, but the fact is that John did publish plans of an extraordinarily simple machine in 1984. multiple people built working models, including Jim Watson, who built a model with a pretty big flywheel on it, and it kept big batteries going. And these are facts of history at this point. It's really not up for debate anymore. But what John wanted to do over the years was just make it simpler and simpler and simpler. And he continued to investigate these phenomena where these unusual electromagnetic properties showed up in circuits and in machines. And after the early successes in the mid '80s for him, and after he had already built multiple working models that would sustain their batteries and things like that, he kind of shifted gears, and he wasn't trying to prove to himself he could do it anymore, which is what the rest of us were trying to figure out and make our first one. He'd made 17 of them, and so he just kind of settled into this experimental mode, whereby he was just looking for simpler variations, and he ran thousands of experiments over the next 20 years, looking for simpler and simpler ways to harness these effects. And by 1999, when a guy who had a shop near him said that his daughter wanted to do a little science fair, and did John have any ideas? John said, sure, I've got this cute little circuit, runs on a 9-volt battery, makes a little motor that runs, it lights a light, and the battery will last a very long time. And so Shawnee Bauman built one. She built it entirely herself. It ran. Battery didn't go down. Lit a light. All the kids loved it. The science fair, the science teachers, basically just flipped out. They could not believe, one, that this thing just kept running and running and running and not discharging the battery. This is just not supposed to happen. How could this 10-year-old girl know more about physics than they did? It was just, it was preposterous. So, they, after it run for 3 days, they stole the battery, during the evening, and instead of letting it run all night for the 4th night, and they wanted to disqualify her, and she couldn't possibly have figured out this thing, and she must be cheating somehow. But all the kids voted her best of show. All the other teachers who didn't know anything about science thought it was just great, thought the science teachers were being unfair, basically forced the science teachers to relent, and she won not only first place, blue ribbon, but best of show, and really was really quite a phenomenon. So the science teachers kind of behind the scenes, from what I understand, I don't know, I've heard these stories, but they basically said, well, we'll let you win this one, but don't enter any more science fairs.
Right.
So they got their little petty revenge, whatever it was, and it did two things for what John was doing. One, it was we consider that Shawnee's replication of John's little motor to be the most important replication ever. One, because it passed the muster of a bunch of very, very skeptical science teachers who didn't want to accept that it worked, but had to because of the situation. They had to accept that it ran, it didn't run its battery down, and it lit a light. And you know, and that they didn't understand it, and but they had to admit that it did do it.
This is the experimental electric motor that Shawnee Bauman, my daughter, built with the help of Mr. John Bedini here. And she took a first place prize, a first quality super scientist award, a best overall plaque, and a best of show for the Coeur d'Alene Science Fair 2000.
Right.
What John did after that was he put the plans for this silly little, you know, science fair motor on a website
KeelyNet thing.
called KeelyNet. It was started out as a bulletin board, ended up as a website.
Early 2001, I think, is when
No,
John's
we're not-
email to
No,
Terry Decker was-
March of 2000.
or 2000.
March of 2000, it was posted on KeelyNet. And, you know, KeelyNet had a group of people who were following, you know, free energy based on, you know, Keely's ideas and all these kinds of things. And again, they looked at this thing and pretty much what I did back in '84. You know, they looked at this and they just said, nah, this can't work. This is ridiculous. And
And a lot of people couldn't even get it to spin.
yeah, they couldn't get it to spin. They couldn't do anything. You know, so I mean, you know.
And it was called the All North Pole motor.
It was called the North Pole motor. Well, on
Yeah.
KeelyNet, it's still called the Science Fair motor. Okay.
With the 3 schematics.
With the schematics that he had hand drawn for Shawnee to work from, exactly. And so that was in year 2000, and at that point, Gene Manning eventually heard about the story, wrote an article for Atlantis Rising magazine. She was a columnist. Regular columnist for that magazine, and she wrote an article, I think in 2002 or 2003, somewhere around that vintage, about the, or maybe it was even sooner than that, 2001. You know, is a little girl leading us to a free energy future?
Attractions
of magnetism,
Yeah.
exactly. And that gave the whole story a little bit more traction. So this started developing towards people taking more notice. John still was getting no respect. Nobody who claimed to know anything about science was interested. Still pretty much, you know, 100% rejection. Can't possibly work. Then during 2004, Sterling Allen came to visit. He was interested. He had a website that was trying to track free energy stories, and so he came to visit John's shop and was shown everything, and asked John if he could publish a set of plans.
And it was already called the Schoolgirl at that time, wasn't it?
Well, no, I think that's about the time that it started being called the Schoolgirl motor. Basically, it started being called the Schoolgirl motor because, especially with the complete rejection of all the people on KeelyNet, there were highly qualified, you know, electrical engineers and people there who could have easily gotten the thing to work if they'd given it, you know, one serious thought. And so basically, John started calling it the Schoolgirl motor just to poke, you know, all the smart guys in the eye, you know, who you know, you think you're so smart, you guy, you know. Well, a 10-year-old girl built it. Okay, you know, it was you know, meant as not a subtle insult, you know, to all the smart guys, you know, to call them a little girl.
We said if a 10-year-old girl can make this work, what the bleep is
What
wrong
the
with
bleep
the
is
whole world?
exactly.
That's still on KeelyNet.
That's still on KeelyNet. And so it started being called the Schoolgirl motor as, you know, kind of a way of, you know, building a permanent insult into into the name of it. And that actually was an interesting development because it started getting people, to take a look at it. It kind of gave it it gave the invention a soundbite, that was kind of rememberable. The North Pole motor, the Science Fair motor, blah, 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 all these other, nothing else kind of got any traction, but as soon as it started being called the schoolgirl motor, they said, well, what's that? So John gave Sterling Allen a modified set of plans where the machine actually ran from one battery and charged a second battery, whereas the one that Shawnee built, basically it just had one battery and the battery just didn't go down very, very fast, and just kept running and running and running from the same battery. So the system that was given to Sterling ran from one battery, charged the second battery, and then you could flip the batteries and just keep flipping the batteries, and it would keep running and running. And so that happened in 2004, and at that point, Sterling also started some discussion threads on Yahoo groups.
Right.
And that started the formal process of the Bedini SG standing for schoolgirl.
Kind of the open source movement.
This started the open source movement in relationship to this technology, and got people really all over the world starting to look at it, experiment with it, getting various results, talking to each other. Well, what if I do this? What if I do that? Well, I got this cool thing to happen, and all this kind of stuff. So at that point, the whole thing just kind of started taking off by itself. And John was in the threads, and other people were in the threads helping. And so it really started taking off from there.
Was that 2004? Was that about when you moved to Spokane and was working with John?
Yeah, I was working with John at the time, and I was actually helping a lot with all of those processes. So I was working for
But
John's
most of the
company.
commercial battery chargers.
Yeah, we were
all
working
that
in
development.
the
The golf
background.
cart, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We were working on the development of a high-powered golf cart charger based on these technologies. For an investor. Exactly. But on the side, we were also supporting all of these people learning about the simple regenerative electric motor that could create mechanical energy and conserve the electricity, basically. Electricity would go in, produce some mechanical energy, and the electricity would come out to charge a second battery, and that these things could basically be put into a continuous loop. And actually in 2002, I had seen John run one of those machines that there's pictures of it various on the internet, where he ran these loops and changed the battery about twice a day for 6 or 7 weeks in a row, and all the batteries were up all the time, and thing just kept going and going and going. And so I've seen John.
Was the big cap dump with the mechanical switch?
That was the big cap dump with the mechanical switch. The big. So he was charging a huge capacitor, 300,000 microfarad. He would charge up to about 15 volts, and then dump across a mechanical contactor into a big series of batteries, and that system just ran and ran and ran and ran. So I've seen John build these things that just definitely just keep going and going.
Right.
Energizer Bunny would be absolutely, livid with rage. That nobody needs to buy the batteries anymore. So I've seen it. I've seen him do it. I've actually seen 3 or 4 different arrangements that he's done that ran indefinitely. So I know it works. That's not an issue for me. Then this all developed and just kept developing until about 2012, when I think we were we were looking at the possibility of putting out a big kit. People wanted, the interest at that point had gotten to the point where it had been in the threads for about 8 years, from 2004 until 2012 about, and just zillions of things have been put in the threads, lots of advanced ideas have been looked at, and all of these different things. And still, there was a lot of confusion about how it ran, why it ran, what it did, all that kind of stuff. And so John authorized basically you and I to put together a definitive set of plans, with a complete parts list and a complete theory and explanation of why the circuits worked and everything else. And so...
and that's basically the Bedini SG, the Complete Beginner's Handbook.
Yeah, that's the Beginner's Handbook.
So that's the first one.
Yeah.
And talking about includes new disclosures on high efficiency running mode.
Yeah.
Run mode.
Yeah.
And that's been available on BediniSG.com ever since.
Since 2012.
And,
And so basically, that machine, that book, a lot of people were skeptical. I mean, there's so much information in the threads by now. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of posts. And, people were really skeptical that the book would have anything new to say, anything they didn't know already. And what happened is that having worked with John, having been right there when a lot of these circuits were tested and everything, I had never actually read the threads. I didn't know what the heck was in them, and I didn't know what was said or what people have been arguing about or any of those things. And so when it came time to write this book, basically I was just writing it from my own knowledge from having worked with John and what I learned about how they work. And so I came up with a very simple way of describing what the circuits were doing, how they were operating, what happened when the transistor turned on, how it turned off, all these different things, how the trigger worked, all these different processes in very, very simple terms, kind of demystify it. And people, who bought the book, first of all, thank you so much for, being interested enough to buy the book. And the people who did recognized immediately that it was just much easier than they thought, and it was I was able to convey the method of operation in a way that people just resonated with, and there was a very, very positive response to the first book coming out.
And plus, people who had been building these for a number of years, just by applying some of the things in the beginner's book, they're able to take the results to a couple levels above where they were. Because everybody was doing repulsion mode, which is what the book showed. North pole's out, you charge the coil, it hits, charges with north and repels the magnet.
Right.
And I know when I met John in about 1999 when he was at the end of Celtice Way, down the end of the building where Shawnee Bauman's dad worked. And when I first met John, and make a long story short, I eventually built the SG little roller skate wheel motor based on the plans on KeelyNet.
Right.
And
pretty much the same size as Shawnee's
spec.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know what the difference between a transistor from a diode or anything. I just got the part numbers, and I laid the circuit out so when you looked at it on a piece of wood, which was my stand, it actually looked like the schematic.
It just looked like the drawing.
It looked like the drawing.
Right.
And spun it on a little 9-volt radio battery. Needs a little bit bigger battery than that, but it actually ran on the first time.
Right.
And I did a ton of experiments with that, and I was always getting results with it that were beyond what everybody else was getting. And it was a little while after that I realized I was actually running in a traction mode
Mhm.
and not repulsion mode. And so anybody out there who has built an SG, and if you have been running in repulsion mode this whole time, you really need to get this book, because if you just convert everything to run it in a traction mode, everything runs cooler. You'll be able to get higher RPMs for less draw. You get more mechanical work, and you're getting more output.
Right. Everything just gets
and
more efficient.
Everything gets more efficient. You know,
Right.
that's just one of the things in there that you should really take a look at.
Okay, so a lot of people were, beyond the beginner's level. They loved the simpler theory. They loved the circuit operations explanations and all of that kind of stuff, and the fact that we in the book we gave a multi coil design that used 7 transistors instead of just one. So it was a slightly more sophisticated circuit. It had a lot of recovery, and it was a nice machine. It was based on the bicycle wheel, like the machine behind us.
And a lot of people have asked, what about like the 10-coiler machine?
Right.
And all that, and it's basically the same thing. You just do multiple
Just
coils.
more coils. Yeah, just
that's-
Once you know how to do this, then you can add as many coils as you want.
Right.
So that's the difference. Obviously, you need different framework and stuff,
Right.
around it, but that's just about it. And it's just mechanical holding mechanisms. So, people, knew how to build a good machine, but then they wanted to know, well, they were still having trouble getting theirs to run as good as John's. Still people were having trouble getting it, to get the back battery to charge as fast as the front battery went down, and all these different things, the supposedly impossible things that physics says you can't do. People were still finding that, damn, it looks like physics is still working in my shop. I can't get this thing to break the laws of physics. What am I doing wrong? So so that led to further interviews with John and say, okay, we need permission. People want to know all your little tricks. How do you fine tune this thing? How do you really bring this thing up to where yours run? And so John eventually gave us permission to release that much information, and so that book came out in 2013.
And that's the intermediate.
Intermediate book.
Bedini SG, the Complete Intermediate Handbook, and that's also on BediniSG.com.
Right.
And you can get either one, or you can get them in a combo.
Yeah.
And we'll be putting the advanced one in a combo
Yeah.
that we'll get to in a minute.
So basically, the intermediate book talks about 3 or 4 different mechanisms whereby John, further reduces how much energy the machine is drawing from the battery in the first place, and adds to how much it's kicking back to the charge battery. And so by feathering all this stuff and getting a little, getting 2% here and 3% here and 4% here with these little tweaks and adjustments, and and getting using a little bit less power here and a little bit less power for that reason and things like this, that you get this thing where you can where this is how much you're putting in and this is how much you're getting back, and you can just start kind of tweaking it until you can get the machine to just keep going. And like John has done multiple times. And so that's what the intermediate book's about. It's really about all of these just super fine tuning methodologies, but also the theory of why these fine tuning things do what they do.
Can you give a brief, simple explanation of what's called the Tesla's method of conversion?
Okay, in an article that Tesla wrote in 1893, he talks about a discovery he made about taking ordinary electricity and turning it into a different form of electricity.
Different qualities to it.
It had different qualities to it. And the article names it the method of conversion. In other words, how do I take supposedly ordinary electricity, whatever ordinary is, and turn it into this other thing that has other properties that can do things that this ordinary electricity can't do so, either at all or very well. And what Tesla discovered was that if he took ordinary electricity and charged up a coil of wire to make a magnetic field, and then discharged that magnetic field in such a way that it would release the energy very quickly, and then he would take that energy and charge a capacitor. He could charge the capacitor to a voltage that was higher than the electricity that he put in from his original source. Right. So in this way, he was able to get electricity to raise its own potential. And this is one of the things that is talked about in here. One of the ways you can recycle electricity is by getting it to raise its own potential, because it's the drop in potential that makes it unusable anymore. In other words, if the battery is draining and the voltage is going down, that's the drop in potential that makes the energy unusable anymore. But the electricity is still there. There's as many electrons in the battery when it's dead as when it's fully charged. So what is this process that makes the energy either available or unavailable? And for electricity, it has to do with allowing the potential to rise. And if you can get the potential to raise itself, then, I don't have to do any work to get the electricity to become available again. So this is what Tesla found. So this very simple process of charging an inductor, discharging an inductor, and charging a capacitor such that the voltage would rise was step one in this method of conversion. Then he would take that capacitor and discharge it into a load that was very, very low resistance. Just one or two turns of a transformer or anything like that. So that all the energy that was stored in this thing could discharge just instantaneously, nearly instantaneously. So in this case, he could take all that stored energy and kind of compress it into a very, very short impulse. And that allowed him to take energy that was available from, say, a battery that was available at a moderate voltage, at a moderate current, charge a coil, discharge that coil into a capacitor, and then you could discharge that capacitor into something else that would basically see a relatively high voltage and a relatively high current for a very, very short duration. So he could take something that was, just a moderate amount of energy.
Amplify the power.
Amplify the power, and he could take the energy that would normally be a moderate discharge across this much time, and then deliver it across this much time like a hammer. And then what he would do is he would do this over and over and over and over again. So if he could do that, he could create this little hammer effect 100 times a second. That was it created an event, an expression of electricity that would do things that the normal, just direct electric flow would never do. And he called this process the method of conversion. And there were a number of very, very interesting applications for this that he had, and he developed basically almost probably over half of his patents from that point on, from 1894 on until his death. Probably half of his patents had to do with that process being applied in this way and that way, and even all the way up through the development of the capacitor discharge ignition system for internal combustion engines, which Tesla invented. That is that same method. You take a coil, you charge a capacitor, you dump it into the thing and create a spark at the spark plug. And these types of things. So these ideas have gone into general use, but for the most part, people have not understood some of the other benefits that could be derived from this. And John found that when you use this process, charge a coil, discharge it into a capacitor, and then dump that into a low impedance load,
Right.
like a battery.
Charge this coil.
Charge that coil,
these caps.
charge these caps, and dump it
This-
into the battery,
right.
because the battery is a very low resistance load. Things would happen in the battery that he wouldn't see under normal circumstances. And so by the application of this process, in miniature form, Tesla was doing this with, 50,000, horsepower or whatever else. John's doing it here with, 20 watts. But the effects are, are comparable, as far as that goes. And so, and this is one of the things that, that the intermediate handbook goes through and talks about the science, where this process came from, how John's technology basically emulates these methods and gets the battery to charge back a lot faster, apparently, than the number of joules that are supposed to account for what a full battery needs. And this is very controversial. People who insist on believing in the laws of thermodynamics and the law of conservation of energy are really upset. They just really don't want to look at this. They just assume that it can't be true. But John, worked out all these processes over decades, and they work.
So if you're watching this, and if a lot of this is new to you, but you happen to be a fan of Tesla, which the Tesla name is getting out there more and more every year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the understanding of what Tesla, was doing is not growing at the same rate as people being familiar with Tesla.
Right.
But if you do want to learn about Tesla in a very simple way, this is where to start, because like what Peter just described about Tesla's method of conversion, that is exactly what you're looking at with the Bedini SG when you're charging a coil, discharging it into a capacitor, charging a battery with it. This is literally miniaturized Tesla technology.
Absolutely. And in
Yeah.
fact, this is his method of conversion was the method that he used to run the magnifying transmitter and all these other things. This was the underlying method that accounted for many of his extraordinary claims of being able to produce energy benefits.
Yeah.
And
And
so-
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's just underappreciated,
Yeah.
really, that this is doing what Tesla was doing on a small scale that's, for the most part, pretty easy for the average experimenter, somebody who wants to get
Right.
into this, to experiment with it.
Right, this
You
is
know,
tabletop Tesla technology without all the sparks.
Right.
And, but the method is the same. And that's really clearly explained. All of the processes and the schematics and the explanations and everything are in the intermediate book. All of that is, made abundantly clear in that book. So again, the theory of the, and the method are both disclosed, as well as a number of other things that show up in these processes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of references in the back of these books too,
Yeah.
like in the appendix.
Yeah, there's appendices and things that
Right.
cover historical documents and so on. So the main thing is that we're not interested in you just believing us, because what we're trying to do here is move the science forward. John already gave this technology into the public domain, so it's not like we're responsible for giving it away. What we're trying to do is educate people so that they can understand why the machine does what it does, and then give you the detailed plans so that you can build one exactly the way John builds one and get the kinds of results John gets in his lab.
In a very concise way, because
Yeah.
it would take somebody literally like tens of thousands of hours to search through everything that's been posted in the
Oh, yeah.
last 15 years online. Then they got to filter it, find out what's
What
better
works,
than other.
right.
And so you're getting it all handed to you on a silver platter.
Pretty much. And
Yeah.
the fact is that it took John, 30 years.
Decades.
Yeah, decades to work out, what we're, what's in these books. It's a tremendous gift by John, to allow Aaron and I to publish this stuff.
Now, when did we publish the intermediate book?
That was in 2013, I think spring of 2013, about a year and a
Okay.
half ago. And in that book, we basically said the advanced book would be about, after we basically showed everybody how to maximize the electrical recovery processes and minimize the electrical inputs, the only thing left was the mechanical energy being produced by the wheel. And so the idea is to show people how to convert that energy manifestation into more electricity and produce as much electricity from that as possible.
So in the last year and a half or so since the intermediate book has been published, we've probably been contacted more by email and phone and every other way. People basically beating the door down wondering when we're going to finally release this, the advanced book, which goes into utilizing mechanical recovery,
Yeah.
you can say mechanical work, using highly efficient generators. And that would be Bedini SG, the Complete Advanced Handbook. And the subtitle is Optimizing Mechanical Recovery with a Low Drag Generator.
Right.
And we're going to be, this will be released on November 2nd, and will also be at BediniSG.com. And we will be offering a package deal where people can get all 3 books if they haven't, if they're completely new to this.
Right.
And so what's kind of a basic rundown on what people are going to be learning in the advanced book?
Well, basically, what we're going to be looking at is pretty much what the machine is here. This machine was actually built as a demonstrator for the 2014 energy
Yeah, the Energy Science and
and
Technology.
Technology Conference.
And that was in the end of June.
End of
last
June,
weekend of June.
Right. And so this was built as a demonstrator of what's going to be covered in the advanced book. And so basically it's a standard kit motor. This is the coil. This is the motoring coil. This is the motoring circuit. All of these things are covered in this system is optimized just up to the level of the intermediate book, okay, which shows all the optimization methodologies. And then what we do is we add an external generator coil. In other words, this we don't ever put any energy into this other than just the magnets going by it, okay? And so then this is able to take, convert the mechanical energy of this thing rolling by and create more electricity that didn't come from our battery in the first place, okay? And so the idea here is to show that if I can run this thing from one battery and charge the back battery almost at the same rate, then basically the gain that's showing up in the system is showing up as the mechanical energy that's turning the wheel.
Yeah, because if whatever we're taking from the front battery
Ends up in the back.
Yeah, we can get about 95%.
Yeah.
Easily with a good quality build,
Right.
tuned and everything.
Well, I mean, and
Yeah.
John can get 100%, and there's
So it can be more.
yeah, it can be more. So I mean, it can be basically that the electricity in and the electricity out is pretty close to 1-to-1. Then the obvious energy gain that's left that is hitting me is the pie in the face is the fact that we're getting mechanical energy produced as well. And so if we can take that mechanical energy and then turn that around and produce more electricity with it by running a generator system, then we can clearly demonstrate that there's more coming out than in. And that's the territory that the advanced book is covering.
Because even if you're getting 95% in the back, you're getting way more than that 5% difference in mechanical.
Yeah, we've measured the
Yeah.
mechanical energy on these things with dynamometers and stuff when they're running. And in repulsion mode, we've measured about 28% mechanical production, and in the attraction mode, we've measured about 35% mechanical energy production. So if we're getting 35% mechanical production out of our input and recovering 95% of the electricity, that means we're putting in 5% to get 35%. So that means that we're way over. But until we actually turn this back into something that we can use, then it doesn't, you know, it all seems like there's still a loss in the system. So that's the idea. The idea is to demonstrate the principles of, you know, of converting the mechanical energy back into more electric. So that's what this demonstrator was built for. Obviously, this was designed as a machine to be shown at the conference. So you know, all the you know, clear plexiglass and everything else is just to show people for sure that there's no hidden wires. There's nothing, you know, nothing's hidden.
Plus it looks nice.
And you know, it's pretty and that kind of thing. So you know, the idea is that we didn't want a lot of people saying, well, we don't know where that wire goes.
Now at the conference, how long was your presentation?
My presentation on at the conference was a little over an hour, I think. Yeah.
And so when on November 2nd, when we release the Advanced Handbook, we're just going to give you Peter's presentation from the conference, which is a full in-depth demonstration of this running, showing what's going on here.
It's got all the schematics.
Yeah,
and all that
which
kind of
basically describes or demonstrates what you're going to learn, and if you apply that in your own machines, you're going to be able to get these kind of results.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, a couple things. This has 7 power windings on it.
Yeah.
And 1 trigger winding. And so there's 7 transistors that this runs on, and typically most people who are running this system built based on these specs, what they're going to learn, at least, you know, within the first 2 books, is the average person is running it on about maybe 1.7 amps to maybe 2 amps.
Basically, it's designed to run at about 1/4 of an amp per transistor. Okay, in other words, that's within
So
what's called the safe operating area.
So 1.75 amps.
1.75 amps for 7 transistors, and that's pretty much standard, you know, for these types of setups. But this one you'll see, we fine tuned
A couple
this
little
puppy.
tricks are explained.
In how to do this. This thing runs at about 1.4 amps, so we've trimmed the input by, I don't know, about what, 20-25%, something like that.
And a higher speed.
And a higher speed. So and that's one of the things that's interesting about this is that usually as you lower the input, the speed goes up, which is really counterintuitive with ordinary electric motors. So anyway, what we'd like to do is cut out, get this thing fired up, and then come back and talk to you about it a little bit. There it is.
And the basic specs for this, with the wire size, the length, the basic circuit and everything, that is all in the beginner's book?
Yeah, basically, yeah. And, you know, the minor modifications we made are clearly described in the advanced book. So I think the only real change is how many magnets are on the wheel. And we changed that slightly just so we get a slightly higher speed out of it. But I think everything else is identical to what's in the first 2 books.
Now right now it's just going to be getting up to the highest speed that it can on its own for this particular circuit. Right now we're at about 1.3 amps.
So basically what I'm going to do is this has reached a relative, this thing is tuned so tightly for minimum energy use that it needs kind of a jump start to get up to full speed.
Which we explain in the book.
Yeah, which we explain in the book. So this little button here is designed to allow it to make that shift. What we're calling the trigger shift switch. So I'm
It's
gonna,
a manual.
It's a manual shift, really, no automatic shifting here. So I'm going to push this, and you can hear it.
Now it is drawing more, but just for a moment
Yeah.
while we're shifting. This is about 2.2 amps right now,
Yeah.
but
So it's pretty much topped out right there. So now if I let go of this, now it drops back to 1 amp and continues to accelerate. Now mind you, this thing hasn't been running in a couple of months actually. It's just been sitting here. So the bearings are cold. You know, nothing's
and we're at 1.2 amps right now.
right. So you can see over here, I don't know if you can see this, but it's already got this battery pushed past 13 and it's discharging the capacitors more than once a second here, a couple times a second. And
Let me show that.
yeah,
So that's these capacitors
You
being
can see-
charged and then discharged into that battery right
this
there.
battery right here, yeah.
And that's available, that cap unit right there is a special unit built by John Bedini, and that's available on the Bedini SG link at teslachargers.com.
Right.
And you can hear it still speeding up just a little bit. And we're just barely over 1.2 amp. We're about 1.3 amps right now,
Yep.
which is about where it was when it was running quite a bit slower. And there's the shift button. And again, what this shift button does and how it works, that's all in the book, the advanced book.
Right.
So a lot of you who have built a lot of these machines and it gets up to whatever speed it gets to, just by adding this little modification to your builds, you'll probably be able to get it to a higher speed, just like we just like you just saw. Faster RPM, less draw here, and more output on the back.
Mm-hmm. And the reason we wanted it to go fast is that the faster the magnet zooms past this coil, the more impulses we can get out of it, because every time a magnet goes by, we can get another impulse, and because the voltage it produces has to do with the rate of change. In other words, how fast this core magnetizes and demagnetizes gives us how high the voltage is, and that allows us to, understand how many of these LEDs we can light and how far this little capacitor system will charge. So,
And do you want to do a RPM test?
with
Yeah,
we've
with
got
that.
we've got a photo tachometer. You can see if I push this. Well, I had one. There it is. Okay, so it's a 0 RPM because there's looking at. So we've got a little spinning spot here. You can see that white line, and so if I'm very, very careful here. So that's pretty close, 361. That's a false reading there. 360.6. That's a false reading.
So 359 to 361. It's about 360
Yeah.
or so.
Yeah, right now it's about 360, and that if we ran it for an hour, and the bearings loosened up and everything, it'd go up to about 370. 370 is typical full speed operation. I don't think we've seen it higher than that.
Going to kick the LEDs on.
Okay.
And these are powered by that generator coil right there.
Right, so basically the energy from this generator coil comes down through these two wires here, and then goes through this switch, and they're all ganged up, and then is used to charge this capacitor, and then the energy from there lights all these LEDs. Okay, so that's that circuit. And so if you listen to the generator, the sound it's making, you could hear it changing tone as it was accelerating. You probably remember that. So I'm going to turn this on now and put the load on the generator and listen to the tone.
And those are blinding.
Yeah, and so so it's down maybe 7 RPM. That's about it, from 360 down to 352. So, in other words, it doesn't slow down very much. And yeah, that shows up pretty good.
Now,
So, yeah, you don't want to look at that.
So if you turn off the lights, we can see right now that this right here is showing classic SG mode, which is basically the basic schematic in the basic and the beginner and intermediate book, where the spikes from this are just directly charging the caps, and
Right.
those caps are being discharged to that battery.
Right.
And right now we can see that we are drawing about 1.3, 1.6 amps.
No, what about 1.3?
Okay, and we're looking at about one discharge, 1,000, 2, 1,000. So about maybe 2 a second.
2 a second.
Okay, now 2 a second, and every time the cap discharges, it's getting to the same volts. And for that capacitance, at the voltage it's set to discharge, you're having the same joules of potential energy in the cap per discharge twice a second, with the draw at this voltage at, barely over 1.3 amps. But
So then John started showing that there's this other mode, which we're calling common ground mode, but he called the generator mode, where the machine functions both as a motor and as a generator. And so we wanted to demonstrate that as well, because he always said that there was a benefit for doing that, having the system run both as a motor and as a generator. And so we built that methodology into this to demonstrate it as well. And here's how that works. When we flip this switch, it switches into generator mode, and what's going to happen is it's going to slow down a little bit. It's going to draw a little bit more current, but it's going to charge this battery a lot faster, and I'll show you. So you can see now it's discharging over 4 times a second. Putting a lot more. You can see this thing's bumped way up now.
1,000. So we have double the output. The cap bank is discharging twice as fast.
Twice as fast.
Went from 2 discharges per second to 4 discharges per second.
Right.
And remember, it's the same joules of potential energy discharging per discharge, because the voltage the caps are set out
this
to
is
discharge
automatic.
remains the same.
Right, this is automatic discharge limit point.
So we've doubled what the caps are delivering, but
So we're basically just at 2 amps right here, and we were at 1.3, so this is only up by 0.7, which means it's up by a little over 50%. So the input goes up by a little, about 50%, and the output goes up by 100%. And so that's very interesting. And again, we can light all the lights still, and that doesn't affect any of these other things as well.
Right.
So this generator is operating with almost no drag whatsoever on the system. So we can run it in either mode and light all these lights without really taking any of the mechanical energy off the wheel at all. So that's what this machine is designed to demonstrate.
so again, only by increasing the draw 50%, we've 100% increased what's coming out of the caps.
Right.
And this schematic, this is all in the...
This is 100%, everything is disclosed 100% in the book.
Yeah.
As far as how this is done and why it works. All of these things, all of John's little tricks and the benefits that he figured out how to make this thing do, get as much benefit out of the least input. All of these tricks and methods are disclosed in these books. And again, when I use the word trick, John used to tell me that how this thing worked was a trick, and I thought, that he was, that I was being tricked, that I was being
a deceptive
lied to.
type of trick.
It was deceptive, all this kind of stuff. No, that's not what the word trick is really a kind of a colloquial reference to a method. Okay, there's 100% science behind all this, and all of it is explained in these books. So when we use the word trick, we mean a very clever method, which in and of itself works every time you do it. So no one's being lied to, no one's being deceived, no one's being tricked. So this gives you a pretty good idea of the all the processes that are covered by these books. We show and talk at great length about the low drag generator systems and how John developed these things and the entire history of these developments. We talk about optimizing all of these processes, minimizing inputs, maximizing outputs of the motoring operations, and maximizing the conversion of the mechanical into more electricity using these low drag generator systems. And so all of this now is fully documented in the entire Bedini SG handbook series. And so the last book, the Complete Advanced Handbook, will be released on November 2nd.
Okay, so on November 2nd, which is next Monday, we're going to be...
Sunday, actually.
Or Sunday, we're going to be our first Sunday release.
Yeah.
Just happens to work out that that's the earliest we're going to be able to release it, which, we want to get it into everybody's hands as soon as possible. And so on BediniSG.com, that's where you can find the beginner, intermediate, and advanced handbooks. Right now there is a combo for the first and second book special, so you can get a little discount there. But on November 2nd, if you don't have any of these books at all, just get the triple pack combo, because you're going to see
On the 2nd, because it's not
on
available
November
yet.
2nd. We will post all three of the books as individual purchases, but the best deal will be the triple combo.
Right.
And
that'll come with a copy of the presentation at my 1 hour presentation at the conference.
at the conference, it'll include that. Right.
And the book, and it's right around, it's coming in right around 200 pages, with all the appendices and historic documents that support all of John's work. So
Now in the it was mentioned in about 1984, John had the free energy, Bedini's free energy generator book. That's what Jim Watson modeled his large-scale replication after.
Right.
Showed it at the Tesla Symposium in Colorado Springs in 1984. And a lot of people have been trying to replicate that machine, have failed. And but what's interesting is that all the details necessary to really replicate it, John has pretty much had in plain view for 30 years, for the most part. There's a few things that will be disclosed for the first time that Peter will be explaining in the book, and but there's also going to be a couple things that will be pointed out that have been sitting there in plain day that nobody has ever really seemed interested in enough and even asking about it.
right. The thing is that John published all this stuff, and so people have been trying to figure out what's missing, what's hidden, all these kinds of things, rather than what's here, what do I actually
Right.
am being shown, so it's most people have been trying to hide their work. John's been trying to reveal his work, and so he's been up against this mentality where people assume that they're not being shown, even though they are, and therefore they it's like we've all had to learn how to take John at his word that this stuff is there. But I did have an opportunity to sit down with John, ask him specific questions, because I know I wanted to cover certain things and make certain specific details really, really obvious where they can't be overlooked anymore, things like that. So there are a number of details. Well, there's a whole lot of details in this book that are revealed and made obvious for the first time, even though they're, if people had taken what he had published 30 years ago and started their experiments there, they would have found out all these things, but it's just been difficult to get any traction really in the public mind. That this stuff was worth pursuing. So we're glad it's gotten to this point. We're glad that all of you are, have got a level of interest that, is wanting to move this thing forward. There's a whole chapter in the back on advances. It's called the Advanced Handbook. This is, we talk about, list, advance after advance after advance. And really the final advance of all this is to take all this information that we've published and put it to use, build a working model for yourself, and that's what you're going to be able to do with this. You're going to be able to take it as far as you want.
So I guess,
That's pretty much it.
here in just a few days, November 2nd, go to BediniSG.com and get a copy of the Advanced Handbook, and get the combo pack if you haven't had it. If you don't even have the beginners or advanced book.
Yeah, there's a lot of references in the advanced book where it just says, and that material was covered really well in either the beginner's handbook or the intermediate handbook, and it doesn't go over it again. So to really fully understand what's going on, you really need the whole set. It's designed that way. No book replaces the other books. It's none of them replace each other. It's a huge volume of information, and it was developed in this order because this was where people were interested.
Right.
But anyway, I'm glad it's done. It's been a lot. It's been a lot of work writing these books, and I'm really thrilled that the information is getting out and is available to you now to take your experiments to the next level.
Anyway, thank you for all of your support, all of your interest, and so with that, thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Years, you've known John a lot longer than I have, back into the 80s.
Yeah, I met John in 1983.
83, and I met him in about 1999 when he was at the end of Celtics Way.
Yeah.
And that was right about the time when Shawnee Bauman, the story of her doing the science project with the little roller skate wheel kind of SG came into play. So, from you knowing John way back then, what about John's work do you remember that specifically ties into the SG and kind of the genesis of where, that kind of came from?
Well, basically, John was interested in, figuring out how to develop a self-running combination of electric motor and electric generator. He claims back into his childhood. Unfortunately, I have to admit that I was obsessed with the same thing, and we've always been told it's impossible and it can't be done and all these other things. And both he and I were working on this really a lot in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. We both kind of got turned on to the whole possibility of this in a very, very strong way when we both ran into the work of Ed Gray in '73 actually. And Ed Gray's technology was just like a real kick in the teeth for everybody because it claimed gains of between 20 and 50 times more energy than it was taking, and kept its batteries charged and produced 80 horsepower and things like this. And so I mean we both got obsessed with the cold electricity ideas and these the fact as far as we understood that a self-running electric motor had been developed, and we just wanted to know more. We couldn't get anything more out of Gray. He was in a business situation where he couldn't release a lot of proprietary information. So it just kind of set us off. It proved to both of us that it was done. It was a fact accompli, and we didn't know how. So, we wanted to know how. So we both set out for it, and John just got way farther ahead than anybody at all times. So they're selling for more than they ever did when they were new. So that's the testament to the fact of how good they are, how in demand they still are, even after all this time. So John's a brilliant circuit designer, engineer, been doing this kind of stuff, pushing all the industries forward that he's been involved in, and one of them is this energy industry, this understanding of how to tap into these very unusual electromagnetic effects to produce self-running electromechanical machines.
So in the early days on this path to free energy, and when it started to come out to the public, his first publication regarding that was probably the Bedini's Free Energy Generator around 1984.
1984.
And at the 1984 Tesla Symposium at the end of June in Colorado Springs, where Jim Watson ran a pretty scaled up model based on John's design, and kept itself charged up while spinning a 100-pound flywheel.
Yeah, exactly. So Jim Watson built a big one out of John's little booklet, and the thing that was so odd about that booklet, because I was else because he had this business where he was building audio amplifiers. So he had a shop, he had an income, he had a place where he could do this. He had
doing really good business.
Building some of the most astonishing audio amplifiers have ever been made. Really the first one to figure out how to get all that warm, fuzzy feeling of the vacuum tube amplifiers, and be able to replicate those qualities in the audio with transistors. And so he made a small fortune doing that, and so he had the resources to fund his favorite hobby, which was this. And
those amplifiers are still being sold on eBay today from the 80s for thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah, for way more than they
More
cost
than they cost
originally.
then,
And they're still running, which is really incredible too. I mean, people get these things out of estate sales and stuff, and send them back to have new capacitors put into a 30-year-old amplifier, and and John's rebuilding these things periodically. And if you go onto eBay and type in Bedini amplifier, there are dozens of them on the market.
Hi everybody, this is Aaron Murakami with Peter Lindemann, and today is October 27th, Monday, And we're going to be talking a little bit about the Bedini SG book trilogy, where if you've been following our work over the last few years, we've released a beginner and intermediate book for Bedini's SG technology. And coming up here on November 2nd, we're going to be releasing the advanced book, which is probably the most highly anticipated book or video that we've ever released consistently over the past several years. The Bedini SG package with both the beginning and intermediate books have been always pretty much the most popular books out of anything.
Yeah, people are very interested in it. So, yeah, we just coming up with a book that actually deserved to be the Complete Advanced Handbook was what was tough, because
Calling it complete.
complete, so like, obviously John's still alive, so he's still a brilliant inventor, so, complete means complete up to now.
Right.
But, yeah, so, anyway, we are really, really pleased to be getting all this information out at this
Right.
point.
So, over the